Foothills.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I am proud to rise and speak to our opposition motion today because certainly the carbon tax is asking all Canadians to pay more. It's asking seniors to pay more, young people to pay more, small business owners to pay more, and certainly farmers to pay more. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you farmers have paid more. In fact, according to Stats Canada, the 2022 crop year was the most expensive in Canadian history. On-farm expenses were more than $11 billion, 12% higher than year over year the previous year, the highest increase in history in Canadian farming. According to the Agriculture Producers Association of Saskatchewan, APAS, many of their members saw their input costs go up 7 times. And much of that can be attributed to the Liberal NDP Carbon Tax Coalition and their carbon tax. Mary Robinson, the chair of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and a potato farmer from PEI, was at Agriculture Committee yesterday, and she said this year's crop year could even be more expensive than what we saw previously. Farm families cannot afford this. This jeopardizes their ability to remain economically viable. Farmers can't afford fertilizer, they can't afford the fuel, they can't afford feed, they can't afford to actually put crops in the ground. And as a result of that, we are seeing many family farms throw up their hands and walk away. Farmers just simply can't be sustainable when they are selling at a loss. We are no longer competitive on the global market. These should be red flags and alarm bells for the current Liberal government. This should be forcing the Liberals to change course. But in fact, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals aren't changing course. They're tripling down on their failed carbon tax policy. They're going to be tripling that carbon tax when Canadians can't afford to put food on the table. Now, the Liberals will argue, as my colleague earlier said, that the Liberals will argue, well, the carbon tax is an environmental plan. It's to ensure that farmers are environmentally sustainable. Well, ironically, they haven't hit a single emissions target that they've set, proving that the carbon tax is a fallacy. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, no farmer can remain environmentally sustainable if they are not economically sustainable. They simply will not cease to exist. And according to the records that we've seen, farmers are having a difficult time remaining sustainable. And unlike most other industries in Canada, Canadian farmers in agriculture pay the carbon tax over and over and over again. They pay it when they buy fertilizer, when they buy feed, when they haul their cattle, when they move grain. They pay the carbon tax from the rail companies, from the trucking companies, from the gas companies, over and over and over again. But Mr. Speaker, what makes this the most frustrating, this carbon tax attack on Canadian farmers, is that they are being punished instead of actually being applauded for the work that they do. Canadian agriculture has reduced its carbon footprint and its emissions by 50% over the last 2 decades. Wow. At the same time, they've increased their yields by 60%. What other industry on planet Earth can make such a claim? And farmers have done this while at the same time reducing their inputs, improving soil health, reducing water input use, and becoming much more efficient. Now, Mr. Speaker, do you know why they have done this? They haven't done this because they've been punished with carbon taxes. They haven't done this of government regulations and government interference. They've done this because it's the right thing to do. They have done this on their own, by embracing technology and new innovation, by embracing new practices like 4R nutrient stewardship, zero-till, precision agriculture. They have done these things on their own, again, because it is the right thing to do. It has improved their efficiency, improved production, but it's the right thing to do, protect their water, their soil, and their animals. But instead of being applauded for that, the Liberal government is punishing them. It is taxing them to produce food at the most sustainable way anywhere in the world. But not only is this punishing Canadian farmers, it's also punishing every single Canadian, because that carbon tax trickles through the supply chain. We are seing it from the farm gate to the grocery store shelves, where tens of thousands of Canadians are struggling to be able to put food on the table. And the impact is very real. When we see the cost of fruit and vegetables up 13%, bread and potatoes up 15%, pasta up 30%. These are the essentials that Canadian families rely on every single day, but they are unable to afford those fundamental parts of their grocery bills because of a Liberal carbon tax that is only going to go higher and higher. Now again, the Liberals will argue, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about here. Most Canadian families get more than what they actually paid into in the carbon tax. Well, Mr. Speaker, we need to end this revenue-neutral carbon tax myth right here, because we know from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that that is factually not true. In fact, we had the Ontario Grain Farmers Association come here at Agriculture Committee and said they are getting about 13 to 15% back on what they spend on the carbon tax.
Wow.
15%. Now that is a long ways from revenue neutral. And in fact, the CFIB just ratified those numbers by saying the average farmer right now is spending about $14,000 a year in the carbon tax. When it is increased on April 1st, they will be paying $45,000 a year in the carbon tax. Now, interestingly, when the Ontario Grain Farmers Association and the CFIB came out with these numbers, showing that clearly the carbon tax is punishing to Canadian farmers and rural Canadians, no one in the Liberal government disputed those numbers. No one came out and said, whoa, 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 we've said this is revenue neutral. That's not true. Well, the reason that they're not coming out and questioning those numbers is because they know it's true. The narrative that they're putting out there is a fallacy. The carbon tax is not revenue neutral. In fact, I've got the member from Winnipeg North saying, well, that's not the case. Well, I asked Finance Canada, as a matter of fact, how much on average does a Canadian farmer get back on the carbon tax? Their answer, $800 a year.
Wow.
$800 a year when they are paying $45,000. My math isn't my strong suit, but I'm pretty sure that's a pretty wide gap compared to what farmers are paying and what they're getting back in the carbon tax. And every single Canadian is paying for that with their grocery bill, and Canadian farmers are certainly bearing the brunt of that. In fact, I had a farmer from Winnipeg area, as the member may be interested to know, and his name was Joachim, and he was at Ag Committee, and he said that the carbon tax is currently costing him about $40,000 a year. And when the Liberal NDP Carbon Tax Coalition triples that carbon tax, he will be paying $136,000 a year. A recent report came out and said, after the carbon tax is tripled, an average 5,000-acre farm will be paying $150,000 a year in carbon taxes alone. You tell me, or anybody in this House, any single one, you come and tell me, especially if you have a rural riding, any of your farmers that can absorb that kind of cost. There isn't one. This is putting the sustainability, the economic sustainability of Canadian agriculture at risk, our food security at risk. Taxing farmers to try and produce food when there's no other alternative when it comes to the fuels they use on farm is nonsensical. It makes no sense, especially when the Parliamentary Budget Officer has certified the numbers that we're talking about here. That is no means revenue neutral. And our Agriculture Minister is complicit on this. She is saddling Canadian farmers with a crippling carbon tax. She's voted against our Bill C-206 that would exempt the carbon tax from on-farm fuels like natural gas and propane. But as Conservatives, we haven't given up the fight. We have brought back a private member's bill, C-234, which will again exempt the carbon tax from on-farm fuels like propane and natural gas, which will help with farmers trying to heat and cool their barns and dry their grain. These are essential for Canadian farmers to remain competitive and viable. Mr. Speaker, it's time to end the attacks on Canadian agriculture. It's time to stop the Liberals from looking at Canadian farmers as part of the problem, because indeed and in fact, Canadian farmers are part of the solution, and this carbon tax has got to go.